Hello everybody and welcome back to Shatter Our Souls with Novaria. And today I took a little bit of a deep dive into the lore and history of the space pirates. And some of what I came across was actually somewhat telling and shocking as far as what actually came about within the storyline of Prime trilogy as a whole. Prime 3's lore begins, I suppose, in part with the ship Colossus. The Colossus was effectively one of the ships that had escaped from planet Zebes. In their lore, they mention very categorically and very plain and simply that the space pirate labs on both Halon 4 and Aether had fallen, both very quickly and without much left over as a result of the Hunter. They had come across a little bit of phazon that was left over after the collapse of Dark Aether, and so they opted to go in and harvest it. Of course, it went about how you would expect. They harvested the phazon. The Federation said, okay, cool, all good. We're not going after that, no big deal. The Federation got their piece. And the space pirates got theirs. In transportation from one end of the galaxy to the next, they ended up coming across Dark Samus, which very quickly consumed all the phazon that they had harvested from Aether, as well as may or may not have destroyed half of the people who had been part of the crew. This, of course, was a negative situation, but they couldn't help but feel in awe of Dark Samus's power. And this, I believe, begins the start of the conversation around whether or not the space pirates were being manipulated by Dark Samus. In reality, I don't believe manipulation is quite a strong enough wording. I believe that, in fact, Dark Samus was outright controlling the space pirates of the Colossus. After showering the Dark Samus, the Hunter, the Dark Hunter, if you will, with gifts of all sizes and shapes, weapons of mass destruction, they eventually were led to a part of space that had a Leviathan. The Leviathan seed that they, of course, found is the very same one that is in orbit above the pirate homeland. This specific Leviathan was outfitted with transportation modules and other machinery that was meant to please Dark Samus. It was meant to act as a solution to some transportation issues and whatnot, as well as outfitted with weapons so as to defend herself. And she took the Colossus into deep space, all the way to planet Faith. Now, this was the first section of her plan. By introducing the space pirates of the Colossus to planet Phase, they have effectively been indoctrinated at this point. They were there acting as a defensive line against those that would attack the Phazon homeworld. Which, all well and good. But there was part of this that didn't really work out. Dark Samus still had more that it desired, more that it wanted. And so, they went out into deep space, looking for one of the few things that has the potential to please Dark Samus. And that, of course, was a Federation Aurora unit, specifically from the Valhalla. Now, this portion is admittedly a little bit fuzzy in my memory of this, but effectively, After the fall of the Valhalla, they brought the Aurora unit back to base so as to be used as a new weapon of sorts, something else. And of course used it to upload the virus to the other Aurora units. This was wonderful. And they began their assault. Their assault on all of the Federation as a whole, starting with Elysia. Elysia was the planet that housed a research station of the deep cosmos. It was believed that if left intact, the Federation would be able to find and possibly destroy Phase. And so, they dropped the first meteor there. The second meteor on Brio. This was due in part to the fuel gel, believing that by reducing the Federation's access to fuel would mean reducing the likelihood of a Federation attack. Perfect. So now we have 2 Phazon seeds out and about. Third was to be sent to the Federation base and spaceport on Noria, believing that by attacking this location, they would inevitably shut down the entire fleet, if you will, and prevent a counterattack. However, this third one was proven to be ineffective and began a major turning point in the plan of the space pirates as a whole. I should also mention that another one prior to all of this was fired at the space pirate homeworld, specifically because the one that was launched at the pirate homeworld had one major goal in mind, which was to share the bounty of Phazon with the rest of their companions and kin. And this is all well and good. This makes a lot of sense. And it also explains in part why the Phazon corruption of the pirate homeworld is as significant as it is. But so far, all of this is to say that the information, or rather, the attacks on the Federation as a whole were not blind. They were not done without any level of forethought. It was calculated. It was planned. Every single one of the locations that was attacked, in some capacity, had either strategic merit, in the case of Dark Samus gaining an army to do her bidding, or had more attack-based merit, wherein it was meant to destroy what would ordinarily be considered a major bonus or problem zone. Correct. Meant to destroy the problem areas of the Federation's land masses, if you will. But their next log is very telling. It states that while the attack on Norion failed, they managed to, in fact, defeat most of the hunters. Samus herself falling in combat to Dark Samus, with each of the other hunters being attacked. This was seen as a great victory for the space pirates as a whole, as it meant that there were fewer beings in the galaxy who could hold their own against them in an actual combat scenario. And so, they celebrated, perhaps prematurely. But in their mind, the hardest part of this battle had already been fought. Won. But that's not where this story ends. 3 of the hunters woke up relatively quickly. These being Rundus, Thor, and gandrayda. And Dark Samus, having been seen as a bit of a strategist, planning ahead, opted to let them run around, do what they needed to do. Effectively, let Rundus, Gore, and Gandrayda do the bidding of the Dark Samus. And this is actually rather interesting, because the same mindset is applied to the other space pirates. That being that when the meteor fell from the sky on the pirate homeworld, they attacked it and tried to fight back against it, only to eventually fall victim to mind control or some other issue as a direct result of this corruption. What interests me about this is that after this point in time, the last few logs speak of Samus's journeys through the cosmos, her awakening on Norian, her arrival on Brio, and how the first of their generals, note generals, would be the one to battle. It was stated that Rundus was ruthless, was willing to do battle with whatever came up, but that his control was very much dependent. Correction. He was very much the one in control of Brio, and acted as effectively the primary leader of that area. But it gets much more telling when you get to Elysium. It mentions that Samus had defeated Rundus, that Brio had fallen, and yet Dark Samus seemed unbothered, unconcerned. And so, they hit their beliefs in Gore. With his capability with the machines and his general intellect, he was a surefire win to beat Samus. And he fell. And so, with a second one of the hunters falling, they turned to Gandrayda. Now, Gandrayda is actually really interesting, because if the lore is to be believed, it means that Samus... How do I want to word this? The Space Pirates knew that Gandrayda was. The Space Pirate knew that Gandrayda was working with them, and still chose to attack. It is said that Gandrayda, on numerous occasions, stopped in the middle of ranks and unsummarily and very quickly ended the lives of anybody who dissented against him, fought against Dark Samus's reign. Anybody who was seen as a potential threat, a non-believer, or worse, a traitor, would be defeated, destroyed outright, never to actually fight again. This is the reign of terror of Dark Samus. And I personally find it very interesting, very telling, as it means that many of the situations that come up throughout the game that are meant to be kind of smaller details end up being a lot bigger, a lot more difficult, and a lot more dangerous. Not just Samus, but all individuals involved. What I like about this piece of the lore, what I like about this information, is that every single one of these logs points to the fact that the Space Pirates in this particular instance were very much in control. To my understanding, the phase-on corruption that you see throughout the series, throughout the game, that takes over creatures like Rundus, Gore, Gandrayda, or even the Bryonian Vortex, were that of just them being corrupted by phase-on. That their anger or aggression was just a natural result of their general situation, not that it had anything to do with manipulation of Dark Samus. It is shown that Gore and Gandrayda had higher functioning thought prior to what happened with Dark Samus. But that they very much, but it was portrayed that Rundus may not have had that same level of control, shall we say. Now, I am going to kind of go into a little bit of theoretical territory, but Samus was also corrupted. With every passing day, with every passing battle, growing closer and closer to being at Dark Samus's effective mercy. Samus is meant to be the strongest of the four hunters, and by no small margin. If we are to use the basic ideology of the four hunters, the easiest way I can effectively describe why Samus is more resistant to Phazon than the rest of them comes down to the Varia. And this seems really weird, right? Why would the Varia suit itself be the reason why Samus has so much better time surviving in these harsher environments and in these situations? And the first thing I think that comes up has to do with Samus's life support system. It is stated, well, is shown in the Bryonian section of the game that the first time Samus ends up going into a hyper mode overload, a Phazon overload, there we go, is her life support systems go absolutely insane, trying to keep Samus as Samus. And this is the part, and this is kind of the point I want to get. Samus is still Samus in this situation because Samus's suit is able to vent the Phazon, which was effectively taking over the mind. She is able to get rid of it and purge it, if at the cost of the energy tanks that she has on board her suit. It still is very much a possibility for her to survive because of the Varia. Another blessing given to her by the Chosen. So, what do you think? Is this something very simple that I just have never paid enough attention to before, or is this something that may actually have some level of credence or merit? Let me know in the comments below. Anyway, we're gearing up to get the last of Samus's upgrade prior to the big final push. Now, the big final push is actually really challenging. Effectively, Samus is going to end up in a situation where we have to defend bomb troopers. Now, the bomb troopers are unique in that they effectively are the replacement for power bombs. And I admit I don't exactly like their inclusion. To me, it made Samus weaker for the plot, which seems to be a running, what's the word? Not a running theme, but a rather common statement that comes up from individuals who have played this game. A lot of Samus's abilities are left weaker or feel weaker as a result of the plot. But the nice thing about this is that Samus doesn't care whether or not the plot demands it. She is going to do what she is going to do. And so, we collect the Nova Beam. Now, the Nova Beam is the only weapon in the game capable of permeating those kind of weird blue walls. This is important, because from here on, any switches that I need to access are going to be on the other side of those lovely, albeit slightly ugly, blue walls. And so, all of that being said, we gain access to numerous new areas, as well as numerous new tools as a direct result of this upgrade of ours, which also happens to work quite nicely in tandem with the other tool we got on the pirate homeworld, being the X-ray visor. So, we have, I suppose, one more major task to get into today, and that is shutting down the pirate homeworld's final bastion of defense. That, of course, being none other than their orbital defense systems. The very same systems that they shut down on Norian. See, this section of the game actually has a lot more unique merit to it than a lot of other sections of the game. This is supposed to be the full circle moment. The moment in time where Samus has eclipsed all prior powers, all prior capabilities, to be able to give back to the space pirates what was delivered to her and to Norian in the opening of the game. And I think it is quite telling that while they needed an entire fleet to fight Norian, the Federation sent one soldier. Now, mind you, they sent Samus, which is a very, very terrifying soldier. But they only needed one soldier. As a bonus, we also get a new tool. The X-ray visor and the Nova beam can now hit vital points on an enemy, which effectively means that most basic enemies can now be one-shot. Provided, of course, that we aren't dealing with, what is it? Enemy hyper mode? Whatever reason, enemy hyper mode overloads the X-ray visor and prevents the one-shot function of the Nova beam activating. Now, in normal mode, this isn't usually too big of an issue, as it's pretty simple for Samus to defeat an enemy, turn around, and fight back. No big deal. However, in hyper mode, we're dealing with the exact opposite problem. Hyper mode enemies can pretty much only be defeated by hyper mode in and of itself, meaning that Samus is now and forever going to be dealing with hyper mode enemies that need to be fought outside of the X-ray visor, just as a direct result of the fact that she can't see anything in the X-ray visor while enemies are in hyper mode. It's a really interesting catch-22. You can one-shot them, theoretically, but the number of times that you are going to actually catch them is not likely in any way, shape, or form. So, yeah. Anyways, onward to the final attack. And we went back to the main area. I'm not even sure when the ship took off. We just kind of landed there. Really funny how that happens. Anyway, off to their orbital defense systems. Now, as soon as my controller stops being silly, there we go. The orbital defense systems have a really interesting system, where Norion's had 3 basic power cells that acted as giant batteries that powered the orbital defense system. The pirate homeworld has 1. And this seems really weird to me, as I feel like 1 just doesn't do it justice. The reason I believe that 1 doesn't do it justice is, while it was pretty simple to shut down each of Norion's power arrays, this one array has more defenses on it than the 3 Norian power supplies combined. we have an impermeable wall guarded by Nova Beam and the lovely X-ray visor, a heavily guarded area with, sorry, doing a quick head count here, 12, 14-ish locks on it, just to shut down one piece of the orbital defense system of the pirate home. Now, let me be clear. The space pirates are incredibly militaristic in nature. They are known for only focusing in on that which would make them stronger in a military sense, or in a combat sense, often neglecting other approaches to the world at large. So, in that way, I don't necessarily see it as a uncharacteristic of them, but I do see it as somewhat overkill, I would say. But obviously, if they're already doing it, they might as well do it good. So we're just going to open up the hatch here and set off any and all alarms in the entire building so that we can bring the fight to us. That's the way it works, right? First key unlocked. 3 additional keys are unlocked. Or 3 additional sections are unlocked. Inside that pipe are 9 separate small beads, if you will. The beads can only be attacked with a combined function of both the Nova Beam and the X-ray visor, and as extra fuel for the fire. Oh wait, that worked? Did that actually? Oh, I can hit through objects even when I can't see what I'm doing. It doesn't seem to affect the instant kill situation, but it does mean that I don't necessarily need to wait to beat all of these guys prior to doing what I need to do. So that's nice. We're just gonna take 1, 2, hit the broadside of a barn. There we go. Round 3. That's 7 blocks. 9 blocks down? Am I counting that right? Whatever. Point is, it's overbearing and ridiculous. I can do the 1 hit. Okay. So I may have made this a lot harder on myself than it needed to be in my older attempts of this same challenge, or of a similar challenge. And oh, 1 left. There we go. With that, there is only 1 block left. And that one is conveniently Samus-shaped. Wonder why that is. It can't be for block convenience. Not at all. Anywho, with the fall of the final piece of their orbital defense system, the raid begins. Starting up next time, we are going to be taking the fight not just to them. We are not just bringing in the battle, but we will also be bringing the battle to the space pirate leader himself. None other than the angry dragon, the purple dinosaur, if you will, Redley. Now, I personally love the future of this particular section of the game. It showcases many small details that really show just how strong and how unique this game's, how strong Samus is, and how unique the game actually ends up.
I knew the Federation could count on you. I've given the order to begin the invasion. I'm headed down there with the troops. Meet me at these coordinates.
Anyway, Admiral Dane has set the final directive for Planet Faye. And we'll make sure that we go through in full. But before that happens, I'm saving, because I do not trust that I will actually be able to make it through this gauntlet in one go. So, I mentioned the gauntlet prior. It is effectively an escort mission, something that I am not very good at, for some odd, strange reason. Escort missions are really the hardest part of most games, so I guess that's where we'll pick up next time. Until then, drop a like, leave a subscribe, and we'll catch you next time. Until then, I hope you have a good one.